Okay, hi guys, everyone. Welcome back to this episode of Made in Asia, the podcast about entrepreneurs and creators in the experience and transformation economies in Asia. Today, very honored to be here with Rohit Dugar. He's the founder of Young Master Ales. It's a brew house.
That's right.
Here in Hong Kong.
It's a craft brewery.
Craft brewery. Was it the first one, really? There's debate about if it was the first one to still be around, basically, right?
It was first of what I would describe as the current wave. So when we opened back in 2013, for a period of time, we were the only ones.
Okay.
But in the past, Hong Kong has had several, startups as well, which opened and shut down.
Okay, that sounds a bit tragic. What went wrong for them? I mean, you're still around, so you're doing well.
I think part of it is sort of a broader thing. If you look at the history of small-scale beer production, and of course, you have to narrow this down because beer is a 10,000-year-old beverage. So narrow it down to, let's say, the last century. The first wave, people use the term microbreweries. This was kind of in the late 80s to 90s timeframe, and lots of small breweries, majority of them kind of in a restaurant, they would serve beer at their own restaurant. That was kind of the trend, and Hong Kong had something similar as part of that trend as well. And then I think for a long time, that trend globally essentially kind of died down. It failed to scale and gain critical mass.
They never stepped outside their production base. They always served restaurant base.
Few did, but and this was global. And also, I think a lot of it was more about not so much kind of original kind of creating things from scratch. A lot of it tended to be like, let's do something that's better than mass-produced beer, but follow, for instance, a template of, say, German beer styles or English beer styles or, something that's kind of a very classical set of styles. And that did not, in my opinion, do enough to capture people's imagination as something that's truly unique and original. Which I think the newest wave of craft beer, more or less started from the U.S. probably 25 years ago.
Sierra
Nevada, and is kind of one of the OGs. And many similar breweries that kind of blazed a new trail, started doing things completely differently.
Right.
And that sparked a much more sort of, that created a bit of a critical mass of following. And people like us, breweries like us are benefiting from that as well, that it showed kind of the path that you have to, have a point of view and express it.
A new way, like organic wines or something like that of late. So when did it catch on with you? I mean, were you always a beer fan, or did you have a moment where I read about, was it Evelyn Locke from Lifestyle Asia wrote a great piece about you. She wrote about a moment you had in New York. But anything before, were you an avid beer drinker?
No, absolutely. I used to like flavorful things, including beer. And I would seek out more flavorful beer, but I don't think I got into it enough to study it until I moved to the States. I used to live in Singapore before I moved to the States. Initially lived in New Hampshire and was exposed to some of the local breweries there. And that opened my mind, and I started to kind of research
So from
a lot
Tiger
more.
Beer, you kind of stepped it up a little bit.
Yeah, although I would say in Singapore too, there were some kind of the sort of 80s, 90s style microbreweries. I used to frequent them, and they used to have some options that weren't, just Tiger.
Clarke Quay area opposite.
Yeah, so Brewworks was one I remember at that time. And there were some bars that used to like specialize in English ales. And there were a couple of bars that specialized in Belgian beers. So I would go to those places, but that was the extent of it. There wasn't anything groundbreaking in the sense modern craft beer is. But at least I would seek out whatever was available to me at that time.
Better stuff. Yeah. So you moved to Hong Kong as a banker, and at one point you threw in the towel on these guys, and you were like, you took a big step forward, right? And again, Evelyn wrote about that in detail. It's a great story. So what was your thought when you said, were you just thirsty, or what got you into this? I mean, what was your was it an opening in the market? What?
I mean, some of all of the above, right? Initially, if you're in in a profession like banking, you kind of start. Well, first of all, there has to be an initial spark. Clearly, there was, having moved here from the States, I felt like the craft beer category all over Asia is basically non-existent, and somebody needs to, and somebody will eventually do something about it. So that was kind of the initial spark, and then it was kind of studying sort of the local rules and regulations a little bit more, and it felt like maybe it's somewhat possible to at least try it out. And then if you work in something like finance, you start to do all kinds of analysis. But a little known secret about analysis is, or a well-known secret about analysis, I guess, is that you can make the models prove whatever you want them to prove. So ultimately, it wasn't about a deeply scientific, calculated kind of thing. Ultimately, it's just binary. Either you do it or you don't. And the clinching thing for us, for my wife and I at that time was, when else are we going to take a risk like this in our lives? We didn't have kids at the time. And it was kind of this notion that we would regret it if we don't do this. So it was at least worth a shot. Let's say we told ourselves, we'll give it a year. If it fails, whatever, we learned a lesson, we go back to finding a job or whatever.
So what was your first priority when you got into it? Were you thinking about, okay, let's get some recipes going? Did you, I mean, where do you start when you say?
Yeah, so that's
a lot of people start sort of in their bathtub or in their, sort of these home kits. Is that, or did you go in with a big scale? Or?
No, definitely home brewing was how I started. And
while you were still working, or was that?
Yes, okay. For sure. Yeah. So home brewing, trying out recipes, learning more and more. And initially when I first moved to Hong Kong, there wasn't really a homebrew scene. You couldn't find ingredients. But then 9 months after I moved to Hong Kong, a guy named Chris Wong started a homebrew store called HK Brewcraft. And slowly some of the guys started companies that imported some American or European craft beer. So slowly the scene, the early seeds of a scene were sown back then. And a few of us, there were probably, maybe 15 to 20 of us who were homebrewers who found each other through the internet. We would meet and we would exchange our homebrews and talk about it. So yeah, that was kind of, how early concept and early ideas about what kind of beers we want to make and what is our point of view started to take shape.
And how many beers did you produce batches before you were like, I think we got something here. This is...
Yeah, so I think that was a big steep learning curve for me, and I think I'm not the only one. Many homebrewers around the world have made kind of this transition from being a homebrewer to professional brewer. You kind of realize that it's not simply a matter of taking a recipe and multiplying it by a factor, and then suddenly you have
it's not scalable.
So you need so that first step of scaling from homebrew level to commercial scale is a huge learning curve. So I think, and there's a lot of things involved in there. You have to figure out process, you have to figure out repeatability, things you don't really need to think about as a home brewer. Okay. You need to think about equipment and automation and all kinds of things. I started to do work, started to talk to a lot of vendors of, beer equipment, just people in the industry through the internet, just kind of reading forums and trying to educate myself. And then eventually I met some professional brewers as well who had been doing it for decades, and eventually decided to work with one such individual, a guy named Uli. So he was our first team member who joined us, and kind of together I had by then at least a reasonably firm idea of kind of 5 to 10 initial beers that I wanted to make, and some kind of rough recipes and so on, and concepts.
Do you need 5 to 10? Is that a good number, or
No,
was that just your?
You can start with one. You can start with more than that number. I think my thought process at that time was, the whole category doesn't exist, and most people familiar with beer, even beer drinkers, in sort of a couple of generations past, have thought of beer as like either it's kind of a yellow fizzy lager thing, or maybe there's a stout, and maybe in Belgium they make some somewhat different beers, and that's kind of the extent of it. But beer has hundreds of traditional styles, and brewers can kind of take that, and the permutations and combinations are endless. So I felt like it's almost a responsibility that we need to showcase a set of styles, showcase what beer can possibly be, and at the same time also showcase better execution of a classic style. So that's kind of how we thought about the first 5 to 10, that we need a mix of different things. We need to do kind of something as classic as a pale ale and an IPA, and we created new concepts like a beer made with buckwheat and matcha, and the idea of very strong beers, stronger than most wines, that are aged in spirits barrels. So all those kinds of things. So I wanted to make sure we showcase at least a good set. We couldn't possibly do everything, obviously, but wanted to make sure we could do at least a set of styles that were that was kind of a starting point for people to learn about beer.
Very good. So here we're at Alvy's, by the way. Alvy's is in Kennedy Town. We'll talk about how that came about in a minute. But so Kingston just brought in a brew of yours. What do we have here?
Well, let me taste it. This is a clean classic Pilsner made with 100% malt. It's our lager beer, essentially. I'm assuming you have the same thing. It looks like it is. It's so this is another example of a traditional classic style, made with better ingredients, made with no artificial sort of additives, unfiltered, unpasteurized product with sort of live yeast in it. So I think and the style itself is relatively subtle. It's not kind of in your face beer like, for instance, this one, which is a bourbon barrel aged imperial
stout. Not as bitter as many pilsners as well.
In that sense, it's a different hop choice. We use some modern American hops instead of traditional Czech style hops that an old school Pilsner would do. And the other thing is it's extremely fresh. So, if you have a beer brewed in Europe, however good it might be, if it has to travel halfway around the world, and it's months old by the time it gets here, in the best case scenario.
Sat in the sun for a while and all that.
It's never going to have that freshness and that mouthfeel that a beer brewed,
As a German Pilsner drinker, I can attest this is a very fresh delight.
So I think to this day we kind of keep that experimentation going.
That's your DNA, so to speak. That's what you are. That's what Young Master is all about.
Yeah. Our team has grown. We started with 2 of us. Now, in the broader group, we have 90 people probably. But in the brewing team, we have almost 10 people. Okay. And a good number of them come from home brewing backgrounds like me. So in home brewing, it's always about experimentation. It's always about doing new things. So that's just ingrained into everybody, because that's kind of the background everybody comes from.
And you'll keep that going, but you stick to your old classics, so to speak, that you'll keep alive.
So I think there's like a dynamic process of deciding what's a classic as well. I think I'll give you one example of it. There's a beer we do called Tatanteng Goza. It's a salted lime sour. Yeah. So this started as a one-off experimental beer that we made one batch, and when it's gone, it's gone, and we do lots of such beers. But demand was strong, so we brewed a second batch and third batch, and then we realized that the idea of this is very simple. If you think about it, it is inspired by a local drink, People drink in local coffee shops, such and things, which is essentially they mix in like Sprite or 7-Up with this salt-cured lime.
Yeah.
So it's refreshing. It is salty, minerally, and it has like a refreshing acidity to it. And we thought of an old school traditional beer style, which at that time, it's made a bit of a revival now, but at that time was kind of forgotten, called Goza, ancient German beer style actually, which is also sour and salty. We thought pairing these two old ideas together to create something new makes a lot of sense. It's still rooted in tried and tested flavor combinations, and the feeling of drinking this on a hot day is something that's kind of in these two very distinct drinks from two different distinct cultures. What you feel at the end of having a sip is similar, so they kind of belong together, is what we thought.
Right.
So I think that in our minds made a lot of sense, but it was even more satisfying to see the strong response. So now it's a year-round beer. We bottle it. It's in lots of supermarkets in Hong Kong. It's almost become a flagship. So I think we are not limited in saying only something like a Pilsner or a slight twist on a Pilsner or a Pale Ale or an IPA or Stout are the only kind of kinds of styles that can be like classics. Things like this we see as new classics, and hopefully over the next in the future we'll come up with more such classics as well.
Right.
And the only way we come up with these things is by constantly experimenting. You don't do it necessarily by design. You do it because it happens organically.
So how many new recipes do you have going at any time? 5, 10, or smaller batch? I mean, you make...
Yeah, so I think so now we have 2 breweries. We started with a very small brewery 7 years ago, and then we opened a second brewery about 4 years ago. The bigger brewery is larger batch. That's where we make kind of our higher volume beers, including the Goza and the Pilsner and
for retail
Pale Ale.
And all that. Yeah, okay.
The higher volume, and the smaller brewery has become kind of a one-off
lab workshop type of thing. That's fun.
So I think on average we have a new beer coming every 2 to 3 weeks. So in a year we probably release maybe 20 something new beers.
Okay.
Maybe more if you include kind of crossovers and other things we do with other breweries and so on.
And have you gotten your failure rate has reduced, or are you still widely experimenting and it's embraced too?
No, I think I think our experimentation rate is very high still. It's probably not going to change. I think we'd like to be able to do even more, especially as we kind of expand in other geographies. And we started as a Hong Kong brewery, and now we see ourselves as sort of we want to play a part in defining the future of Asian craft beer. So we are in Southeast Asia, we are in mainland China, and we want to belong there and be as local in some of these markets as we are here. That means more experimentation. That means more, inspiration from all of these places as well that we can incorporate.
And so for those who are not too familiar, Young Masters started in Hong Kong. As you said, now we'll talk about distribution first. Yeah. At what point, because we talk about recipe and the good beer, that's the fun part, right? But you need to sell this stuff too. So you famously set up the Ale project.
Yes.
In Jordan, Mongkok.
In Mongkok. Yeah.
And that was already 6 years ago, right?
6 years now.
Fairly early in the process. Yeah. When did it spark to you? You're like, crap, I need to start. Like, I mean, first of all, why? And then when did the spark come? That distribution is actually a big part of the business.
Yeah, so I think I would actually use, at least back then, maybe distribution is a word we'll use, to talk more about today's challenges. Back then, the biggest challenge in Hong Kong was education. How do we even get people to try, let alone, them being repeat buyers or loyal customers? How do we even get them to access and try? So I think before we started the brewery, my initial thought process was maybe we'll need a small kind of a tap room or something like that where we can showcase. People can find us and at least try our beers. But then I think, this going back to something I was talking about earlier, around that time, some of that ecosystem started to build a little bit. A couple of tap rooms opened that were focused on craft beer. Some imported craft started to come in. So I felt maybe it's not so important. So we didn't do it day one. But soon after that, within a few months, and back then we used to do we still do brewery tours once a week. And we used to get people who would find us on the internet and come to these tours from, all over Hong Kong. And at that time, we had started selling at maybe, let's say, a dozen locations, but they were, mostly kind of on the Hong Kong Island side, maybe one or two on the Kowloon side in TST, but mostly central, Wan Chai, neighborhoods like that. But people would ask, I live in Mongkok or I live in, Tai Kok Choi
Right.
or all these neighborhoods. Where do I find your beer? And I had no answer for them. And walking around these neighborhoods, I felt like there's no place where we could even sell our beers to. They wouldn't know how to take care of it. And
What a blue girl territory in that. So
at that time, obviously it's transformed now, but at that time it was just impossible. But we knew that there is end consumer demand, but the gatekeepers in the middle, the bars, restaurants, retail shops, didn't have a clue that there is, end user demand for this stuff.
And their contracts are also pretty restricted about what they can.
Yes, I mean they still are, and that's another problem. But even that aside, even if let's say there's an independent coffee shop or something like that, but they were not familiar with the idea of craft beer. So the only way to break this deadlock, we thought, was let's do a small shop of our own. Let's do it in a neighborhood like Mongkok, where it's probably the hardest. It will take a long time for our beers to penetrate.
How did it work out?
It worked out great. We kind of, a few of us got together and built this place basically by hand. We spent whatever resources we had on building kind of the best draft system and a cold room to keep all the beers to make sure they're poured the best possible way. But everything was very bare. It was a dive bar and it was very bare and minimal. And from day one, it formed a cult following almost. And to this day, I think it remains probably the geekiest beer bar in Hong Kong and attracts kind of the most sort of loyal, discerning crowd that really understands their beer.
Yeah.
So we're very proud of that project. Recently, 6 years, our lease finished and a landlord wanted to increase our rent by 50%.
Old Hong Kong story. Yeah.
In the middle of COVID. But, so that was very disappointing. But then I guess as luck would have it, a spot became available 2 doors down. So we really had a downtime of about a month and we reopened just literally 2 doors down, almost identical size and everything else. So Hakpo Street, Mongkok will continue to have tap for a long time.
Good. Hopefully it's a long lease. 3+3 or something like that.
It's I think this time it's 6+3 or something. So we should be
beautiful. Okay, guys, check it out. The project in Mongkok. So obviously you didn't stop there, right? One was not enough. So when did this kind of dawn on you that you had to push harder on?
I mean, initially it was all organic. I mean, now our plans are a bit different and we are more deliberate about it.
Because Shenzhen and Singapore, right? That came later. But.
So after the success of TAP, we thought, let's find another neighborhood where we can introduce this idea. And we found an opportunity in Tai Hang near Causeway Bay. There was new development and we thought, we had a real opportunity to be like an anchor place for this neighborhood. And it was a bigger space. We could do more with food. We partnered with Chef Mei Chow to kind of do elevated sort of modern Cantonese-inspired gastropub food. And we went crazy with kind of the beer pouring setup. To this day, it's the only place in Hong Kong that has 3 different cold storage areas to serve different kinds of beers at 3 different temperatures. which takes up a lot of space and space
Of course,
in Hong Kong.
yeah.
But that's what we do. So we sort of paid a lot of spent a lot of resources on it, and that I think we are very proud of that project. It's elevated the idea of craft beer and craft beer food pairing, and created a interesting new neighborhood
That's
spot.
1842, is that?
No, that's called Second Draft.
Oh, Second Draft.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you have another one.
So
it
after,
kept growing, basically,
yes,
right?
after Second Draft, we went to this neighborhood and Aldi's. I had lived in New York before coming to Hong Kong, and I sometimes missed this vibe of this sort of, bars kind of in the city that are like, sort of elevated dive bars that are really comfortable. And I wanted kind of to experience that New York vibe, but incorporate sort of have a sense of place that we are here in Hong Kong, infuse some of the elements of the city, obviously have our beers. So we decided to come up with this place.
Okay.
So we sort of went back to New York, ate a lot of pizza, drank a lot of beer, decided we kind of designed our own style of pizza, which is neither Neapolitan nor is it New York slice. But it has elements of both. And we again, like with beer, we do some of the classic pizzas. We do an old school sort of a la vodka sauce pizza, which is very vintage New York, not Italian, but New York Italian. But at the same time, we do a pizza with char siu and a ginger scallion dressing. We do a mala pizza, which comes with a mountain of, chilies
okay.
and Sichuan peppercorns and stuff on top. So we decided, so created this quirky neighborhood pizza place, and kind of kept going with the tap rooms. And Singapore opened, and mainland China, and
Shenzhen, right?
Yeah.
So how is it different doing business, since we got Made in Asia? We got to talk about Singapore and Shenzhen. So big learning curve, or where? I mean,
yeah, for sure. And we're still learning, obviously, every day.
You went to Singapore first?
Singapore first. Okay. And I think Singapore is doing business there was more similar to Hong Kong as you might expect. It's a cosmopolitan city, and I've lived in Singapore as well, so in that sense it was quite familiar as well. I went to college in Singapore, so it was in some sense a familiar territory. Ease of setup everything was straightforward. Taxation on beer is very high there. That's probably the biggest challenge we face.
For authorities listening, please lower the tax in Singapore. Though.
Yeah. But
so you're shipping it from here, right?
Yes, everything is still made in Hong Kong, and it's shipped there. And this was a big concern initially, but then Singapore infrastructure is incredibly good. The beer is freshly packaged here, let's say on day 1. Day 6, it's in bars in Singapore, and it's 100% cold the entire time to the bar. The cold chain infrastructure, everything is, works so well that, there could actually be times we realize that there could be a batch of beer, let's say, that got ready and got packaged, and day 6 it's in a bar in Singapore. Sometimes it might not make it to certain bars in Hong Kong by day 6. It might be day 9 or 10. So I think it's almost seamless freshness wise. Mainland China is different, obviously, but Singapore in that sense, back end operations wise, was very smooth.
Okay. How about the preferences around beer types? Is that very different between the 3 markets, or?
I get asked that question a lot, but I kind of dismiss that idea. I don't think, and especially for us being in the craft business, we are not in the business of trying to sort of distill to a very simplistic lesson on, people in Singapore drink this and let's give them more of that. And, it's similar to the notion a lot of, say, Western brewers had about Asia in general, is that, oh, Asians don't like bitter beer because, the historical data shows, bitter beers haven't sold here. But then, people haven't been properly exposed to those
right
beers.
type, yeah.
So I feel like, craft beer is about variety intrinsically. And we need to always do a wide variety of styles, and there will always be something for a certain mood or a certain occasion or a certain palate at that time. So I wouldn't generalize a whole people by saying they like a certain kind of beer. What I would say is that, we need to if we really truly want to be kind of sort of enmeshed in local sort of fabric, as well as we've managed to do in Hong Kong, we need to work with a lot of other local brands and kind of take inspiration from local food and drinks. So that constant experimentation needs to happen. But the goal of that experimentation is not necessarily to come to simplistic definition of what people there like.
Right.
And I do think this will always be an evolving process as well. Even if for a few years, let's say a certain beer style sells a lot, I don't necessarily think that's forever. So what should be forever is the spirit of experimentation, not a certain product.
So at what point are you going to make Singapore, like the Cha San Teng here is very Hong Kong. Most of the beers are very true to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Have you started making beers that are, Laksa is maybe not the best example, but
we've done a number of them already. They've mostly been experimental one batch kind of beers. We've made kind of sort of Tetarik beer or sort of tea-inspired beers. We've made pandan beers, and we've done a wide variety of ingredient driven beers. We've collaborated with local cocktail bars. For example, Native, which is kind of one of the world's top cocktail bars and is all about kind of sustainability and zero waste. So we collaborated with them to make a beer with husk of cacao, things that are normally thrown away, but actually have a lot of flavor, and cascara, which is kind of the outer skin of coffee beans. So we made a stout with all of these the outer skin, and we call that beer thick skin. Those are the kinds of things we've been doing. We obviously started a few years after Hong Kong, but we intend to do more and more.
Okay.
And it's at least in these markets, I would say we can't obviously do this everywhere in every market, but for the time being, for the near future, we see sort of within Southeast Asia, certainly Singapore is a core market, and around here, southern China is something we are very focused on, and we'll do more and more there as well. That's sort of very localized. Whether some of these projects lead to a widely distributed beer or not is not necessarily the goal. It may be a consequence, but the goal is to just experiment a lot and do a lot of new things.
Yeah, sounds like you're having a lot of fun.
Yeah,
and
basically.
Playing around and seeing what sticks. Okay, that's always good to have, right? You're your own master, I guess. In that way, you don't have to. I mean, at the end of the year, you need to make a profit, but at the end of the day, it's more for the passion of it. That's why you started this, right?
No, it's both, and we are a craft business, right? So, I mean, if we lose that, we will stop being a craft business.
Selling out, yeah.
And, I mean, if we were 10,000 times bigger than we are, probably we would be forced to do that. But, we have a long way to go. So until then, this is what differentiates us from the big companies. We can't match them in financial muscle and resources.
Scale, yeah. What do you see yourself producing in Singapore, Shenzhen, or another market? Or is that still a bit too far to?
I think not so soon. I don't see the need quite yet. But yeah, I mean, it's something we keep an open mind about. I can see sort of Greater Bay Area, Southern China, probably more likely than Southeast Asia production, or sooner anyway, but not in kind of the near foreseeable future.
Right. Let's talk about your collabs. As you mentioned, you've done a lot of those in restaurants, in pop-ups or events like that. You go with a bar, you go with I think you did cookie department as well, was it? was that from the beginning, or people were interested and you just have an idea and you want to check it out, see what's happening? Where
the very first one we did was, I think this concept we always had in mind that, we want to be part of the community, and we want to contribute to it. We want to learn from it, and that's how we kind of become a part of a society's fabric. That was kind of the big picture thought we always had. But the first one was Mandarin Oriental. We did a beer called Captain's Bar beer with them, which is served exclusively at the Captain's Bar. We've been doing that for, almost 6 years now, actually. And, we started to do more and more with other top hotels, with the Shangri-La Group, for instance, with as new as Murray Hotel and St. Regis. A lot of these kind of higher end hotels want a bespoke experience, so that became kind of its own thing that, let's create something bespoke for sort of your high end clientele.
That's mostly bottled or also on draft?
Both. So,
okay.
Well, it's certain things are only bottled, but the Captain's Bar is draft only. Shangri-La is both draft and bottles, but Murray Hotel is bottle only. So it's it depends on the specific situation. Then we did a lot of, we also do, it's common in the craft beer industry to collaborate with other craft breweries. That we constantly do all over the world. We're fortunate to be part of this circuit of edgy, cool craft breweries that we respect a lot from everywhere, that we do projects together. This year it slowed down a bit because, nobody has been able to travel, although we did do a couple of virtual collabs. Then we started to do a lot of local brands. This year we collaborated with Hong Kong Tramways, and we did a couple of beers called a Ding Ding series of beers that was sold in Circle K convenience stores, and we kind of developed a flavor together with them. We've collaborated with sort of hot pot chains. We've collaborated with all kinds of brands where there's mutual respect and kind of creatively we get along.
And what's the process if somebody wants to have their own beer, maybe even for a birthday, right? You say it's my, maybe not the 20th, but the 50th birthday. And do you do that as well?
Not really. We may have done that years ago, but I think usually there are batch size constraints, a whole sort of batch, even our smaller batch would be too big for an individual
Where does
party
that
or
start?
something like that.
2,000?
Around 1,000 liters, which is about 3,000 bottles or cans.
Okay.
That's sort of the smallest.
Big birthday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you know what? We've done that too. It was somebody's I forget, it was 30th or 40th birthday, and they actually commissioned us to do a whole barrel of really special barrel aged beer. And that was hand bottled in these beautiful champagne bottles with the wax, and those beers are designed for aging, so they could keep it in their cellar for a long time. That was a fun project. But
speaking of the aging, so your wood barrel aging program is pretty well established by now, and you also have the oak further.
Yeah.
So that's something quite unique, even in craft brewing, no? I mean,
certainly in this part of the world. We started to do barrel aging pretty much from day one. Back then, day one, along with the brewery, even though we had limited resources, I thought, we should at least do some barrel aging. So I bought 8 barrels. It was literally 8 whiskey barrels, bourbon barrels.
They're still around, or do you have to replace them?
We do replace them. Okay. Depending on the beer, we can use them anywhere between 1 to 3 times. Okay. And then we kind of discard them. So we started that from day one. We made a rye wine, which is a strong rye beer. And then we kept going, and now we have probably Asia's biggest barrel aging program in the craft beer world. The oak fooder was a new addition. Well, now it's not so new anymore. It started in 2016 when we built our second brewery. And it's a 4,000 liter fooder that we use to make mixed fermentation beers, which means beers fermented with wild yeast from the atmosphere, almost a sourdough-like concept. And these beers take a long time to age and mature and develop their complex, sour, funky flavors. They have a wine-like quality to them. And then So we make this base beer, and then we make extensions by aging them further in, say, white wine or red wine barrels, sometimes adding fruits to them. But these are all very small batches that are made, with a very manual, expensive process. And we release them a few times a year, and they're sought after in sort of the beer geek community.
So what's a good way, if anybody's thirsty listening, they're like, I want to get my Young Master Brew. Obviously very tasty. What's the best way? You have a website? You should come to Alvy's. Where can you...
So yeah, if you're based in Hong Kong, there are plenty of ways, obviously, where today that you can find our beers. Obviously, while we are in the middle of the pandemic, bars and restaurants are probably, even though we're, all open until 6 p.m. and then after that takeaway, that's a little bit less of an option. People can buy from our website. Obviously, we do home deliveries. That has been that has really taken off this year as well. People are enjoying beers at home. There are a number of other e-commerce websites where we sell our beers. Supermarkets like Jason's Marketplace, etc. carry our beers. Specialty craft beer bottle shops carry our beers as well. So in Hong Kong, there are plenty of channels where our beers are available. But of course, the full range is only available on our website.
Right.
All
you
other
ship
places.
globally, or?
So shipping wise, we've been deliberate and careful about this. For the first 4 years of our existence, or 3.5 years, we focused only in Hong Kong. Then we opened our Singapore office, and we decided not to work with a distributor and do it entirely ourselves. So we can control the quality, control the supply chain, control the range. And we do the same in mainland China as well. We self-distribute all our beers. More recently, we've kind of sort of launched in a few other markets, some in a soft way, like very recently, and this is something we kind of haven't even very broadly announced. We've launched in the US. This is something we've been working on for like the past year or so. We signed up with a distributor we have a lot of respect for, and we designed 2 specific beers just for the US. They're available here on draft, but not yet in bottles and cans. Obviously, US is dealing with its own very serious pandemic issues. So we just wanted to send our beers, and hopefully some of the people who follow us have access to them. But when things become more normal, we hope to do more there as well. Beyond that, we distribute regularly in Malaysia. We semi-regularly send beers to Australia. And we participate in at least a pre-COVID era in a lot of events and pop-ups all over the world. Potentially, we might launch in 1 or 2 markets next year as well.
Okay. And festivals was always a big part of that. It's events, right? So
huge.
there's craft brew events, and you're always there. I mean,
so at kind of the highest ends of global craft beer, the festival circuit has become a huge part of the scene. It's where kind of if you're really sort of a craft beer follower, you kind of go to this circuit of festivals. And there are, really cool festivals in the US, in Europe, in Japan, all over the world really now. And a lot of these are by invitation only. Okay. So breweries are invited to come showcase their beers at these festivals. We're fortunate to get invited to a lot of the best ones as well. In most of them, we are usually the only Asian brewery. Hopefully that number grows in coming years. Asian scene is still kind of nascent. But it's a place to enjoy sort of the most cutting edge, really cool, interesting beers that everybody has brought. And usually all the brewers bring kind of their edgiest, coolest beers. They tend not to bring, or they might bring 1 or 2 of their staples, but generally they bring kind of the most bizarre and interesting.
Okay. The geekiness that comes through. And let's talk about competition, because in craft brew scene, it's a very, it's a community vibe, right? Yeah. It's not, I guess you have the brewers, the big ones that you have to, defend yourself against. Yes. So there's enough competition out there. Absolutely. But then the craft brew is very, very, like not buddy, but you kind of, communal. Yeah. And how does that work in Hong Kong? You said that it's still nascent. I mean, it's come around in the rest of Asia. Where are things trending around that then?
Yeah, so I think Big picture, it's certainly true that it's, our competition is the big beer companies. Our competition is, it's, even though we've come a long way, it's still education is kind of the biggest hurdle we face. How do we get more people exposed to the idea of craft beer, get them to even try? That's kind
at a
of
premium price too, right? I mean,
at a somewhat premium price, but I think it is definitely a premium price, but it is ultimately beer, and it's not. We are not talking about luxury pricing, right? It's when you're comparing it to kind of wine or cocktails or any of those other categories. It's sort of a very affordable luxury, even if you want to use the word. So I think end consumer price, I actually don't think the difference is that much of a deal breaker. It is sort of the middlemen where more of the challenge is. And it's less a price point issue and more like, the marketing dollars and all of the exclusive contracts that you talk about. Those are very hard to kind of compete against. And we can only differentiate ourselves on a product. And ultimately, I think people speak with their wallets, and we hope that more and more of these middlemen learn that there is so much end demand out there in more places. Make craft beer available. That is really kind of the path we need to kind of continue to fight.
So more craft brewers will have more awareness and more exposure, and lift everybody's boat, basically.
I think so. If you take the U.S. example, maybe today U.S. has reached a stage where craft brewers truly are competing against each other as well.
Okay.
But we are far from that in this part of the world.
Yeah, and as you say, the beer awareness is still very much with the large brewers, for better or worse, right? I mean,
they have the marketing dollars and
sponsorship everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay. Talk about women in craft brewing. I know you have your barrel aging program manager, Jessica Lee, is it?
Yes.
But otherwise, it's mostly guys. Is it true? I mean, or is that just my...
No, I think women in brewing, in modern brewing, I think it's definitely something the industry needs to do a lot more work on. Our team broadly is, fairly even gender-wise, but specifically the production team, as you pointed out, is more men than women. Jessica Lee, is an example. She went from managing the barrel aging program to getting promoted to managing overall production process and scheduling, which is a complicated job. Hong Kong has something called the Pink Boot Society, and a lot of the young master women working for Young Master are kind of a big part of that and very active in that society, trying to do lots of events to raise money for scholarships for women to study brewing, to kind of sort of educate and sort of fight a lot of stereotypes that the broader food and beverage industry has as well. Like, oftentimes when we go to a new bar or restaurant, try to sell them beer, for instance, and we get sort of sexist remarks back, is this beer suitable for men or women? Like, it's, so we have to kind of, and a lot of the industry has this notion that, certain beers are quote unquote girly or lighter, or if it's like a floral, fruitier flavor, it's for women. But we find that not to be true at all when we look at the end consumers, when we do tastings. There is no gender. In fact, if anything, women who are craft beer drinkers tend to be more adventurous. So I think there's a lot of work to be done at many different levels, at the consumer level, at sort of the industry level of kind of education and sort of helping break these stereotypes. And, hiring wise, I think on the one hand, we are very fortunate. I think we have a lot of female representation in our company, but I think on the production side, we need to do more to kind of find more women who are, interested in working on the brewery floor.
So you mentioned you worked with professional brewers before. Is that the better way? Not the better way, but is that the, how do you say, as a career choice, that would be the way to go? You study brewing, or do you join a big brewer, or you do it at home, or you join somebody like your master as a craft brewer, or what's a good choice?
It depends on who you are and what setup you have. But I think if you're starting out, let's say you want to start a commercial brewery and you don't have that experience in your team, I think it's absolutely essential to have somebody like that on board too, because it's not just about experimentation. Brewing is half art and half science. That's how we see it. You can have the best, most interesting ideas, for instance, as a home brewer, but you need to understand technical execution, and that's a very specialized skill set. So you need to acquire that, and if you don't have it, either have somebody on the team with that experience, or institutionally slowly build it. I think that's kind of how we did it. Uli had decades of commercial brewing experience. He went through German brewing apprenticeship program, and that experience was necessary for us to make consistently high quality beer.
You take in apprentices, or you offer that and something like that?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly not in a way that's as structured as Germany has a very structured apprenticeship program. It's not quite like that, but yes, we are open to people coming in. We have actually this year we had 2 interns from guys who used to be actually Hong Kong based, but they are studying overseas in brewing school and coming back for the summer programs and interning with us. So in that sense, we do provide that option.
Good. Okay. So also mindful of time. When we look ahead for the next 10 years, what do you think will change your craft brewing industry the most? I mean, what do you see? Well, not necessarily disruption, but what's something you're thinking about in the slow burner lane, sort of like what change is coming that you're...
I think I think there's probably a broader definition of craft drinks. I feel like there is still sort of silos of craft beer is one thing, craft cocktails is another thing, craft spirits, natural wines, and so on. There is a lot of opportunity to create completely new things from first principles that may have characteristics of one or more of these categories. So I think more experimentation over a period of time could lead to some breakthroughs. Ultimately, there is a certain purpose why people want to enjoy a certain beverage. And it doesn't need to be limited by sort of these false boundaries. So I think that is something we think about quite a lot. And this is not something, that happens overnight. But I think having generally an open mind about what's, what people want to enjoy and what brings people together. And, that's... and also kind of an Asian angle to it all. We don't have to do things the way they're, or we don't only have to do things the way they're necessarily done in the West or elsewhere. We can have our own version of things and our own culture of drinking, our own kinds of venues. So I think that's sort of how we want to position ourselves and keep innovation as sort of the central thing of what we do.
Yeah, and that's part of the craft brew, I guess. Yeah. Identity. You also do cider, I saw earlier. So how does that fit?
No, actually, we haven't done a cider. Okay. I mean, we have a cider here, for instance, at Alvy's. Okay. That is actually locally fermented, but it's not from us. But yeah, I mean, we are open to all of those things. I mean, we've hesitated to do cider here, partly because, the fruit is not grown near here. So we kind of want to be, if it's such a fruit added to beer is one thing, but if it is kind of the only fermentable. We hesitate to do it in a place that it doesn't. We think that belongs closer to the farm.
Right. And so your ingredients, you said you have American hops, right?
Yeah.
You have Australian hops.
So we have hops from all over the world, but heavily American hops, some Australian hops, some European as well, but a lot of American hops. We have European malt for the most part. And, yeast we kind of grow ourselves or buy from some labs. Okay. We use local water. I think beer in that sense is, I talked about blurring of boundaries, but I'll go back to boundaries now. Beer, one way is fundamentally different from, say, wine is that it is made with dried ingredients. And actually, as a brewer, as a craft brewer, we have access to exactly the same ingredients in exactly the same condition as somebody in Europe or the US and vice versa. Of course, assuming they choose to buy the good ingredients. And brewing is done year round. It is not linked to a harvest.
Seasonal, yeah.
Wine, grape harvest is a certain time and you make wine once a year kind of thing. So in that sense, it's like a constant process. And therefore, the localization is a bit less about ingredients. Of course, it can be as well if you're, say, in New York State and you want to use local rye and local New York State grown hops, for instance. You can do that, but it's not really about that because you're dealing with dried ingredients anyway.
Okay, but the water is the local water. So
Yes.
Hong Kong water is pretty, has a lot of... it's very hard water, right? As you say.
No, it's totally the opposite. It's actually we do lab tests on it all the time. Hong Kong water is actually extremely low mineral content water.
Okay.
It's almost zero. It's actually very close to pure H2O.
Because it's all rain water runoff on the island.
Yeah, and then it's purified and then it's basically what you get is fairly clean. Now, what happens in some old buildings? And that's like a kind of a last mile issue that there's old piping and you might get some kind of pollutants from the line itself, which are easily processed. We're fortunate in our building, we get very clean water. So I think, but the important thing is that by itself, that is not necessarily good or a bad thing. It is really certain flavor profiles are kind of helped by minerals in water. So for instance, if you have like a sweeter, maltier, richer beer, like a heavy stout, you want more sodium and you want a bit of alkalinity in it. But those things we can adjust. It's much easier and lower cost for us to do it if the water starts with a blank slate. It's easier to add things than it would be to completely remove everything and re-add everything.
Right.
So we can get water that mimics the certain ancient beer styles evolved because of the kind of water in that place. For instance, in the UK, it's a darker, maltier styles. So if evolved because of the mineral content, and similarly, Czech Pilsner or German lagers, so the higher sulfate content or generally low mineral content suited those styles. But we can mimic water from anywhere in the world basically by adding those and adjusting those minerals.
Okay. All right. Great. Rohit, we're almost up on time.
Yeah.
Tell me, how do you kick back when you're not, is it, do you have a beer or you drink a wine or do you watch a movie or obviously now it's COVID, not too much can do. You have a family, right? So
yes,
how do you switch off or get away from it all?
2 kids, spending time with kids, playing with them. For sure.
How old are they?
4 and 6.
4 and 6, okay.
So that's kind of
Keeps
a
you busy.
big part of, what I end up doing in free time. But, beer is still a big part of relaxation as well.
Yeah.
I drink wine, I drink all the other things too, but,
See what's out there, right? Do you travel much anywhere? Not during COVID days, right? But
I think in the first few years of starting Young Master, there wasn't a lot of travel. But in recent years, there was a lot more. Obviously, the global festival circuit was one. And, frequent trips to Singapore and Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Shanghai as well.
Getting across the border is becoming easier, right? Hop on the train.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Where's your shop in Shenzhen?
So in Shenzhen, So the bar that we open is currently closed.
Okay.
Goon Goon, we are hoping to reopen it, hopefully after Chinese New Year next year, something like that. We don't have a firm
As
date on
COVID
it.
comes and goes, yeah. Okay. Good. All right. Looking forward to that. I might have to go to Shenzhen as well, but it's not so easy right now. Maybe Macau would be on the radar too.
Yeah, I mean, we send beer there. Macau is straightforward. We've not, I'll be honest, we've not paid a lot of active attention there, but we probably will.
Plenty of casinos that need beer, I'm sure.
Well, actually, you know what? We thought that too, but I think the casinos there they're different from Vegas. There's a lot less drinking. There's a lot of tea drinking, a lot of very serious gaming going on. But having said that, there's still sort of fun parts of the city. And
obviously, before we close, we got to talk about this drink and drive. Do you make a non-alcohol beer? Or is that like
we made it as a so? I mean, that's a whole technical discussion on. First of all, we would only make it if we can deliver a similar flavor experience as we do in our alcoholic beers, which is easier said than done. And there are ways to do it. There are biological methods that we like, or industrial methods like yeast that doesn't produce alcohol, so we do the fermentation process. Industrial processes basically make a regular beer, and through kind of high temperature treatment basically remove the alcohol, which also strips away a lot of the flavor compounds. Yeah. So that's not what we would ever do. So we've done it once as a one-off, and we'll probably do it again. We have to decide. We are going to do it in January again as like a dry January thing. So yeah, we're kind of experimenting with it. Okay. We have not done it as a broad release in bottles and cans, but yeah, why not?
Innovation always at the fore. Youngmasterales.com, right? Is the website?
Yes, that is correct.
Youngmasterales.com. You're on Instagram as well?
Yes, Youngmaster Ales.
Youngmaster Ales, the IG handle. So we're up on time. The restaurant's still busy. Delivery is happening. You hear the ding ding. That's always when it's having a smile because it's working. So fantastic.
No, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
It was really fun. Good to learn about beer. Obviously, I bring a bit of understanding with it here and there. I had maybe 2 beers before I came here, not today. But yeah, this is great. Young Master is definitely a beer. Keeps innovating, keeps it creative, keeps it fun. I think that's the best part. It's playful and it's delicious. So thanks for this episode, guys. We're here at Alvy's. This was really a treat. I think a great way to get into the Christmas season. Holidays are coming up, so Merry Christmas from Alvy's, and see you next time.
Merry Christmas.
All right, Merry Christmas and cheers.
Cheers.
All right, thank you, Rohit.
Thank you.
Cheers.